starting from page 96. Could you elaborate on solid information or proofs on that?
In the Hebrew Bible, there are many passages which state that the Jews have a mortal enemy whom they call Amalek, and it is for them a racial belief that there is a tribe of Amalekites who are out to destroy the Jews, and God has commanded the Jews to completely exterminate the Amalekites down to the last man, woman, and child. They cannot leave a single Amalekite left alive. And when I began looking into that Jewish belief system, I found many writings in the Hebrew Bible, in the Jewish Talmud, and in Jewish Kabbalistic writings where it expressly states that in order for the Jewish people to receive redemption, in order for them to have their Messiah come and be restored in Palestine and build the Jewish temple, they have to exterminate the Amalekites. And the Jewish people associated the Armenians with the Amalekites. They believe that the Armenian people represent this racial enemy of the Jews which has to be exterminated. And there were many side issues that relate to that. The Armenians were the first nation to become Christians, and the Jews have always waged a war against Christianity. And that also played into it. And it is an absolute religious commandment for Jews that they have to exterminate the Amalekites, which means that they have to exterminate the Armenians.
Is it until the modern days, until the starting of 1900s? I mean, what kind of solid writings they have that we could associate with the Armenian genocide?
Yes, it is. It's a very modern belief, and it's a belief that is passed along to different people whom the Jewish people associate as their enemy. In the Bible, it says that God will have a war with Amalek from generation to generation. And at the specific time of the Armenian genocide, both in the phase that took place from 1894 to 1896 and at the height of the genocide in 1915, we have contemporary writings in Hebrew in Jewish publications where they call the Armenians the Amalekites. And they state that they have no mercy for them because they are the Amalekites. And you can find this in Yair Oran's book, Zionism and the Armenian Genocide, The Banality of Indifference. And you can also find it in Elliot Horowitz's book, which I believe is called Reckless Rights. And you can find it in the Encyclopedia Judaica under Armenians, and also in the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia under Armenians.
And basically, could you elaborate how did they make it possible to basically make their vision, enable their vision to basically do the mass murder of Armenians?
Well, that gets into the Turkish Empire. And the Turkish Empire in the period of the 1890s, which is also the same period that political Zionism took root in the writings of Pinsker and Theodor Herzl, the Zionist Jews had a stronghold within the Turkish Empire in the Salonican Jewish community, where there were many Jewish bankers and Jewish Freemasons who were organizing a revolt against the Turkish Empire. Because one of the chief goals of Zionism was to break apart the Turkish Empire so that they could take Palestine from the Arabs and give it to European Jews. And they also had to destroy the Russian Empire because the majority of European Jews lived in Russia, and Russia would not let the Jews go because they knew it would result in economic hardships. So they engineered the First World War in order to break apart the Russian Empire and break apart the Turkish Empire. And they could engineer the First World War by pitting Christians against Muslims. And they decided that one way they could pit Christians against Muslims was to have the Sultan start killing Armenians. And they did that by convincing the Sultan that it was the Armenians who were going to conduct a revolution against the Sultan, and that the Christians were plotting to destroy the Turkish Empire. And so the Sultan began committing atrocities in the Balkans and in Turkey itself, and that started to create an outrage in England and America against Islam. Christians started to become pitted against Muslims.
Right.
Then then the Salonican Jews, through their Committee of Union and Progress and meeting in Freemasonic lodges, there was a man named Emmanuel Caruso, who was the Grand Master of the Macedonian Resorta Masonic Lodge in Salonika. And they, through funding through Italian banking Jews and ultimately through the Rothschild bankers of the City of London, fomented a revolution against the Sultan, which began, I think, in June of 1908, and they finally deposed the Sultan in 1909. And they then started committing heinous atrocities against Christians in the Balkans and specifically against the Armenians in order to use that to cause the Christians to want to wage war against the Turkish Empire. And that resulted in the Balkan Wars. And then the Balkan Wars resulted in World War I. And in World War I, the leaders of the so-called Young Turks were actually all crypto-Jews from Salonika. And the chief of those was Talat Pasha. And Talat Pasha instituted a program of extermination of the Armenians in order to bring America and England into the region as Christian saviors of the Armenians. And they also attacked Russia because Russia had traditionally been a strong defender, especially of Greek Christians, in the Turkish Empire. And in this way, they were able to foment the First World War. And another motivation they had to kill the Armenians was the fact that the Armenians were at that time considered the most intelligent and most successful group of people on the face of the earth. And the Jews wanted to take over their businesses and their residences and give them to Russian Jews who would emigrate into the region, eventually pushing them into Palestine. So they wanted to get rid of a business competitor, and that would also contribute to the destruction of the Turkish Empire, which they sought, because the Armenians were often statesmen and controlled the bureaucracy of the Turkish Empire, and the Turks were very inefficient, but the Armenians were very intelligent and were very successful. They were the best doctors, the best lawyers throughout the Turkish Empire. And by killing off the Armenians, they ensured the ultimate destruction of the Turkish Empire.
And I would like to go back. You talked about Salonika. Where did the initial movement start of these crypto Jews who came to Salonika, basically?
Jews had a very strong foothold in the Spanish Empire, and they had very good relations with Spanish Catholics. And whenever the Jewish people settle in an area, they start to tend to have good relations with the native people, and Jewish leaders don't like that because it leads to Jewish assimilation. And Jewish leaders try to keep Jews segregated from Christians and from other people so that they can preserve the Jewish race until the time of the Messianic age, when they believe the Jewish Messiah will come and redeem the Jewish people and deliver them to Jerusalem and to Palestine. So the Jewish leaders orchestrated in 1492, the same year that they tried to send ships to America to create a homeland for the Jews, but that was unsuccessful. So they expelled the Jews from Spain, and many of the Jews from Spain went to Salonika, Greece, or Macedonia, and settled there. Other Jews remained in the Spanish Empire, and they had a choice to either convert to Christianity or die or leave. Those were their three options. So those Jews who remained in Spain, many of them pretended to be Catholics, and they would pretend to be the most ardent Catholics. You could always identify them by the fact that they were the most religious Catholics. But in secret, they would continue to practice Judaism. And another event that took place within the Turkish Empire itself is around 1666, there was a Jewish man named Shabbatai Tzvi, who thought that he was the coming of the Jewish Messiah and that he would redeem the Jewish people and restore them to Palestine. This, of course, incurred the wrath of the Sultan, who did not want the Jews to take over his empire. So he latched on to Shabbatai Tzvi and insisted that he convert to Islam or he'd cut his head off. And Shabbatai Tzvi pretended to convert to Islam so that he could subvert the religion from within. And many of his followers pretended to convert to Islam. And like the supposedly Catholic Jews of Spain, they were often the most ardently religious Islamic people in the Turkish Empire, even though in secret they would remain Jews. And they would even not tell their children that they were Jews until they reached a certain age. I think it was 13 or 18.
Right.
And this formed a cult in Salonika. And Shabbatai Sevi, when he died, Jews believe that the souls can be reincarnated like the Buddhists believe, especially within this sect of Judaism, which to be known as the Dernmei. And they believe that the soul of Shabbatai Sevi passed on to a man named Baruch Yah Russo. And Baruch Yah Russo established a Dernmei cult in Salonika, Greece. Now, these Jews were heavily into the Lurian Kabbalah, which is a subversive movement that